Okay, this is a very quick overview of coding, what are codes, how do we do this, and so forth. But we've now got even more data, even more information that we need to collect and make sense of somehow. So this requires some way of managing your data, of keeping track of your research process. Now you can do this in the old-fashioned way. This is what I did in my master's thesis, where maybe I had about 10 interviews and different documents, where it included a lot of sticky notes, a lot of highlighter pens, Excel spreadsheets, and printing. And this can work for smaller projects, but as a PhD, I'm going to give you some advice. It will not work for your PhD. Once I started my PhD, I realized that the amounts of data that I was going to be analyzing was going to be unmanageable. I had over 1,000 pages of transcripts, plus Facebook posts, documents, policies, and so forth. So this sticky note system wasn't going to work. So my advice to you at the start of your PhD or master thesis or at any point in your research process is to set aside some time and try to get your head around one of these data software programs, because it will really make your job a lot easier, also when you get to this data analysis stage. This is where qualitative research programs like NVivo, MaxQDA, Atlas TI, and there's many, many more out there, are really useful. So I'm going to show you a quick video on, I've used NVivo in my PhD, and just show you some of the functionalities of how that works.
In this short video, I just want to give you a quick overview of some of the functionalities of NVivo. Many of the other data management software tools are similar in what they offer and similar in what they do. I'm not going to go into how exactly you code and upload files and so forth, because there's many more informative videos out there that probably will do a better job. But what I want to show you is some of the functionalities of this program using my PhD project as an example. So first off, we can see on the side here that you can upload different sorts of files, whether they're transcripts, newspaper articles, documents, and so forth. You can then, if you go here, start to classify them according to your research design. So for me, I had 2 cases, Australia and Ireland. Within those cases, I had different people that I interviewed, and that is how I was categorizing them, cases and then people. And then the transcripts are all there already. So if I press this, you can see a document of all the different transcripts, and if I went into one or the other, that would show you that there. So if I press here as an example, here is one of the interviews. We can start to see along the side here, coding density shows you how many times things were coded at a certain spot. So here it's a lot, here less so. But then we start to see what's interesting is what is being coded at the same time. So you can code something in multiple ways. And what we're starting to see here, and we can start to draw out, is some of the relationships between these different codes. So agency of resistance and strategies, or gas-filled-free communities and inclusive, or democracy. Kind of why they're sort of always at the same spots with each other or not within one document. The other thing, the thing that's sort of probably more important, is if we go to this idea of coding and codes. We can see here my first level of codes that I have done. Then we can click here, the next level, and so on and so forth. And I want to show you another thing that you can do. So if we go into, for example, regulation and law, and I press this code, it'll come up, kind of spit out all the different times that was coded. So the details about the interview, coverage, but also critically it has these quotes here. So I can say you can do searches up here. Say I want to know every time I coded regulation and law with labour fractions, and it will tell you what codes, what quotes and where. The other interesting or kind of thing I found very useful was the different diagrams that you can produce. So for example, here we have social reproduction as a code, and it shows me where and how it was coded according to what transcripts or documents here, but also how it relates to other codes like public infrastructure, services, gender, and so forth. This is another example of how that works. Another way to visualize your data. And then, one of the bigger ways of visualizing it is through this, so we can start to draw out some of the relationships between the kind of parent codes and then the child codes, and how often they were used and so forth. So there's multiple different ways to do this. I'm just showing you a few to hopefully kind of interest you in how this can be done. But then also on the side here is a thing called notes, memos, journals, transcript summaries, annotations, and memo links. And this you can really think of as your research diary. So you can make memos to yourself, you can maintain a research journal, classifying and justifying each of the coding decisions that you're making. This is as much for your own research process, but potentially also for your examiners, for your methodology chapter in your thesis. You can go back and you can see exactly what you did and when and why. But also if other people want to look at your data or your project at a certain point, they can see how those decisions were also being made. So as you can see, you can use this software as kind of more or less a data management tool, or you can kind of go into like much deeper of these functionalities that it has. I've tended to use it more as a shallow kind of data management tool, which I've also found incredibly useful. But yeah, there's so much more that it can do. The other programs that are out there are offering similar kind of capacity and capabilities. And yeah, I'd really encourage you to research which one would be best for you.
Thank you. I hope that showed some of the functionalities of NVivo. And like I said in the video, these other programs do similar things. I showed you this one because it's the one that I know the best. So I'm going to finish here on some final tips, some final things to keep in mind when you're doing coding and doing document analysis. So number one is a reflexivity journal, a research journal, whatever you want to call it. You need this to document your coding decisions, the rationale behind them, your memos, and so forth. As I showed in the video, you can do this in the software, which is another benefit of the software. But if not, do it in a diary, do it in a book. Thinking about not only is this good for your methodology chapter, i.e. you have this that you can kind of actually quote from if you need to, but also when you get to the point of defending your thesis. It'll be a year and a half after you've done this data analysis, maybe longer, that you'll be defending. This will remind you of those questions that will come up in the defense. Also, you can start to integrate some of this into your methodology chapter. For example, in my thesis, each chapter was organized around a specific theme, importance of coding here. And then in the introduction to each of these chapters, I sort of documented part of this coding process, how I was articulating different codes and so forth. And that came from my research diary. The other point I want to talk about is this question of when have I finished coding? This is, again, a question like, when is my sample big enough? It is really dependent on your actual project and the questions that you're asking of the data. So you finish coding when you have a justifiable story to tell. And if you want to stop at the level of description, you can do this. You can use coding as descriptive analysis. i.e. I could have stopped at water protesters in Ireland stated or understood expropriation as state-driven water charges, finance, capital, and so forth. Or you can develop a much more analytical analysis, which most PhDs do need to be, to go beyond this and explore how do they say this, why. An example of this is water protesters in Ireland link expropriation to financial interests embedded in the strategic selectivities of the state, a state that is no longer amenable to their interests. So you can see the difference here between a descriptive or an analytical analysis. The type of coding you do will depend on the questions you ask. Another point to keep in mind at all of these steps is ethics. What is the documents that you're using? Are they private? Are they public? What are the ethical considerations you need to make? And this comes into play also when you start publishing from your thesis. So when you submit to any journals, they will ask you, have you got ethics approval? And it'll make your job so much easier if you start thinking about this now. Be conscious also of your theoretical paradigms that you're working in. Is the type of coding you're using coherent with these theoretical paradigms? And another good tip would be to start reading articles who are really focusing on methodology or studies that you have used in your thesis. Look at them and explore their methods section in particular, exactly how they're doing it. So yeah, I'm going to end on the point of making sure that you justify every step of your research process. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to coming into contact with you or your research at some point in the future.